I'm Steve Pinker and I'm Harvard College professor and Johnstone Family Professor, Harvard Department of Psychology. The cognitive revolution which took place at Harvard was the start after modern scientific study of the mind. Who study something like the mind, you like to think that you're a scientist, you face the immediate problem of what we do with these things called mental contents, thoughts, emotions, images, plans, rules. You can't see them, you can't taste them, then you can't feel them. If you're a scientist, you are supposed to be studying things that you can see, measure and manipulate. How do you even begin with a science of mind? Well, the answer is the dominated psychology in the middle part of the 20th century, where it just to give up all talks of mental contents. This is the school of behaviorism and came to take over American psychology until the early 1950s, when a number of scholars with ties to Harvard started to rethink that whole idea. When we talk about how computers work, you can't get around computing internal states to them. Computers have memories, they have goal states, they execute plans, and if you could do that about a hunk of metal and you are not being unscientific, why should be on the scientific to say those things about a human being? The result was called cognitive science, included both experimental psychology.
In today's lecture, I'm going to talk about changes in air pollution since the middle of the last century, and what has created these changes. By the 1950s, air pollution was very visible, with frequent thick black fogs known as smogs in many large cities around the world. The main source of this pollution was from factories, and it caused severe health problems. For example, a particularly severe smog in London in 1952 caused over 4,000 deaths. Obviously something had to be done, and in 1956 a Clean Air Act was introduced in Britain. This addressed the pollution from factories, and the smog soon disappeared. However, as you know, these days air pollution is still a big issue. The main difference between now and the 1950s is that you can't see it, it's invisible. Also, the main source of pollution now is from cars and lorries, and although these don't produce visible signs, this air pollution is still a significant risk to health. And one of the key factors in the rise of this type of pollution is that we have all become much more vehicle dependent. There are far more cars and lorries, trains and planes than in the 1950s, and this is now the main source of air pollution around the world.
Equality, diversity, and inclusion, EDI, are at the heart of what we do at the British Council and are directly linked to our values. They represent the mutual trust, respect, and understanding we strive for on behalf of the UK. They are integral to our reputation, success, and business sustainability because they allow us to draw on the widest possible field of talent, skills, and inspiration. That in turn puts EDI at the core of our cultural relations mission. In our practice, we aim to achieve alignment between what we say and what we do. We want everyone who comes into contact with us, both offline and online, to feel valued and respected, and our programs, services, and ways of working to demonstrate our stated commitment to EDI. We believe this will enrich everyone's experiences and ultimately lead to more inclusive societies. At the British Council, we focus on 6 areas of diversity, aligned to those protected by UK equality legislation: age, disability, ethnicity or race, gender, religion or belief, and sexual identity. We recognize that these different areas intersect and, together with other characteristics such as socioeconomic status and geographical location, form our multifaceted identities.
The social model of disability moves away from a deficit-focused approach to disability, where the differences of the individual are seen as a personal inadequacy or abnormality. This medical model of thinking requires that the individual is mended or cured, and then supported to enable them to fit in. Social models of disability turn the medical model around. It is the school or the organization that carries the responsibility to change, not the individual. Barriers to inclusion are social, not personal. If steps are an issue for a physically disabled child, then a ramp must be provided. If a child's intellectual abilities are too high or too low for the current curriculum offer, then the curriculum must be developed or extended. All 3 of these theoretical models are useful to explore in terms of inclusion and can challenge our thinking. Who makes the policies and promotes best practice in relation to inclusion? Are we as a school, a training institution, or as a practitioner actively challenging our unconscious biases and prejudices? To what extent are we currently adopting social or medical models of disability in our policies and practices? New approaches. All pupils flourish in well-managed classrooms. When teachers discuss and communicate basic rules and structures with their pupils, classrooms become places to learn prosocial behavior.
There are currently more than 68 million people around the world who have been forcibly displaced by conflict or persecution. They include internally displaced people, IDPs, and people displaced across borders or to third countries. Nigeria is host to all three. In Iraq, about 3 million are internally displaced and 250,000 are Syrian refugees. Lebanon hosts a higher density of refugees per capita than any other country in the world. Greece has around 60,000 refugees who were prevented from moving to third countries by the EU-Turkish agreement. Approximately 27 million refugees and IDPs are children, many of whom have been out of school for years due to conflict. Other factors that exclude these children from a normal education in new host communities include language, ethnic discrimination, religion, differing parent and teacher expectations and culture, school systems, and a lack of resources. Factors that exacerbate their vulnerability include the trauma of war, loss and displacement, and fear for their own safety. This section explores support for children, youth, new teachers, and experienced teachers who are displaced or must deal with displacement because of conflict, in Nigeria because of Boko Haram, in Iraq because of ISIS, and in Lebanon and Greece because of the war in Syria.
In May 2014, at the World Economic Forum meeting in Abuja, Nigeria, the Nigerian government and the Global Business Coalition for Education, in conjunction with Nigerian business leaders, announced the launch of the Safe Schools initiative to pilot 500 safe schools in the northeast of Nigeria following the educational consequences of the Boko Haram insurgency. The Safe Schools initiative also established a $10 million fund to support the requirements and growth of the program. Gordon Brown, the UN Special Envoy for Global Education, visited Nigeria to support the establishment of this initiative and pledged the support of the international community in bringing education to the regions affected by Boko Haram. Beyond the initial investment, the initiative also aimed to bolster the physical protection of schools, train school staff as safety officers, and provide school counselors and counseling to affected schools. By November 2014, the government identified 2,400 students from Yobe, Adamawa, and Borno states as the primary enrollment cohort into the Safe Schools initiative. In May 2018, the Safe Schools Initiative's Secretariat reported the following 3 points of progress. The first 2,400 students had been transferred to 43 federal colleges, 3 schools in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states had been chosen to pilot a schools rehabilitation program to upgrade physical infrastructure. Introduce deterrence to potential attackers and formulate rapid response plans for teachers and students.
There are some components of the English for Resilience course that are crucial to its success. In many teacher training courses, the participants deliver micro-teaching sessions where they practice on their colleagues. In this program, the mentors and coaches were able to practice on the beneficiaries in the youth centers, trying out activities immediately after the input sessions, in real conditions, and getting feedback and support. This gave Marie and I insight into the reality of the environment, and we were able to modify the training accordingly. The experiential learning model allowed activities to be tried out and experienced rather than simply talked about. This was particularly important in teaching practice when lessons did not go well. Rather than viewing lessons as successful or not, it was important for all participants to view mistakes in teaching practice as learning opportunities. Discussions about challenging behavior from students led to a noticeable positive change in the coach's teaching and mentors' awareness of what makes effective feedback. Marie developed simple, practical handbooks for coaches and mentors specifically for the course, which had a suitable language level and embraced the idea of resilience and language teaching.
Interviews with the UK mentors after the 3-month program ended show that most of their time was spent discussing English language teaching (ELT). Younger, less experienced coaches asked about activities they could use in class and classroom management, especially how to deal with unruly adolescent boys. More experienced coaches enjoyed speaking to the UK mentors as equals about the teaching profession. Part of the time was also dedicated to informal English language improvement. The UK mentors expressed their surprise at the normality of the environment in Kurdistan, which belied their expectations, particularly when they watched videos of the classes. One mentor talked about the older teacher she was working with, who had recently had to flee from his home with his family because of Daesh, but who had experienced conflict all his life due to his ethnicity. His work as a teacher was his lifeline, as it represented some stability in a situation of constant disruption, and his sessions with her where he was able to speak as one professional to another validated him in some way. The fact that he never missed a session, he was never late, and always stayed online for the full hour showed the importance of these meetings. The UK mentors repeatedly mentioned how much they got out of the sessions, as they discovered a reality very different from that portrayed in the news.
In the period 2015-16, more than 1 million refugees and migrants passed through Greece, having fled violence and persecution in their home countries. According to this data, refugees and migrants entering Greece mostly came from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran and Pakistan, and 62% were women and children. They were largely heterogeneous in terms of language, religion, nationality, culture, socioeconomic status, and legal status, and moved from the Greek islands to the mainland and then onwards to other European transit countries. Since the implementation of the EU-Turkey agreement in March 2016, however, most refugees and migrants arriving in Greece were prevented from moving on, leaving almost 60,000 people based in Greece, including more than 23,000 children. The demands on humanitarian aid for refugee and migrant populations increased hugely, with families in need of adequate shelter, food, basic support, and health services. Refugee and migrant children and adolescents face unique challenges, including separation from their parents and other family members, varying levels of familiarity with, and adjustment to, a new culture, lack of access to education and healthcare services, language barriers, uncertain legal status, prejudice and social exclusion, multiple moves, and trauma exposure that can increase the risk of psychological, behavioral, or emotional problems and school failure.
In March 2016, the Greek Ministry of Education set up reception and preparatory classes in certain public schools during afternoon hours for refugee and migrant children aged 6 to 15 who lived at official refugee sites. The aim of this transitional program was to facilitate the gradual integration of refugee and migrant children into the Greek mainstream educational system. In the school year 2016-17, it is estimated that 2,643 children joined 145 afternoon classes in 111 public schools. 7 the following year, as refugee and migrant children and their families started moving out of official refugee accommodation sites into urban apartments, the Ministry of Education placed more emphasis on organizing morning reception classes for children and adolescents aged 6 to 18. These classes were part of the Greek formal education system and were aimed at students with limited knowledge of the Greek language. According to the Ministry of Education, approximately 2,000 refugee and migrant children attended such morning reception classes in the school year 2016-17. It is important to note that the integration of refugee and migrant students into state schools has been implemented in an environment that is itself in a constant state of flux. The sudden and heterogeneous linguistic, cultural and learning needs of a diverse refugee and migrant community has created a challenge, not only for new, untrained and inexperienced teachers hired for the reception classes, but also for seasoned teachers who were accustomed to teaching in mostly homogeneous mainstream Greek classrooms. Both groups lack training in multicultural and multilingual pedagogies, crisis intervention strategies, psychosocial empowering, and skills to manage diversified classrooms and cope with the influx of refugee and migrant students. The Language for Resilience report, published by the British Council, highlights the barriers education providers and teachers face when attempting to implement innovation both in the classroom and in the school system as a whole. These were identified as a lack of space in the curriculum, a lack of teacher capacity to deal with the complex additional needs of the new school population, the inflexibility of large education systems, and the impossibility of certifying learners who do not conform to local assessment requirements.